I've always definitely tried to keep my ears and eyes open for people that I could learn from, and try to implement the lessons. And that's the last piece. I think a lot of people want to get around successful people. Very few will actually do the work or take the advice that they were given and execute. But if you do, your level of access to those people will be exponential.
Today, we're going to be speaking with Justin Konikow here. He runs a phenomenal brokerage, Prime Real Estate Brokerage. He focuses on diversification. So he calls it focused diversification, which is really cool. So he doesn't only focus on the residential side. He focuses on commercial. He does new construction, and he's kind of like the special forces of real estate. So really excited to jump in and to find out how he's focusing on this brokerage to be able to serve clients and keep them within that brokerage, regardless of whatever they want when it comes to their real estate needs. Justin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark. I got a ton of respect for what you've built as well, and excited to collaborate.
Yeah. Well, why don't we start with Prime Real Estate Brokerage? I want to start with that. How'd you come up with that name? And then I want to get into your backstory, but why don't you tell us a little bit about Prime Real Estate, where you got that name from?
Yeah, so my wife and I were actually sitting in our car at the Grand Bend Harbor, watching the boats go in and out, watching sunsets. She grew up there, and it's one of our favorite spots. And at the time, we were actually named Justin Konikow Real Estate Brokerage. It was the two of us, one buyer agent, and I think a VA. I don't even think we had like an in-person assistant yet. And she's like, if you ever name the brokerage something, what would you name it? And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know, what would you name it? She literally looked up and said Prime Real Estate. And the reason she said that was we were looking at the boats going in and out, and every boat has a name on it that really speaks to what that person's vision is of the ship that they're trying to create or where they're trying to go with it. And I think that's why she wanted to create something different. And Shannon's the brains of the operation, MBA from the Richard Ivey School of Business. Like the whole idea of building a company that specializes in real estate marketing and sales versus a brokerage was her idea. So I think that name was a perfect fit. Emailed my lawyer. He said the trademark was available, which I was shocked about. So we put our name in the hat and we got it.
Yeah, it was meant to be. Well, you know what? We're going to get to that point. And, Shannon being such a big part of the brokerage as well, I want to talk a little bit about that because there's some alignment with Joanna, my wife, and with the background in marketing. So we'll get into that. And we'll get into how you scaled your company up to do over 200 transactions a year and over 200 million a year. So it's not just a little operation. Justin runs a big business. So let's go back to the beginning, though. Why don't you share the origin story and how you started?
I mean, the origin story of how I got started was my wife threw me off a cliff. If anybody's familiar with London, Ontario, a little place called Joe Cool's and Jim Bob Ray's that I managed for years. That's actually where I worked. I did every job in the company and I worked hard. My wife had come from a family that built an automotive dealership in the middle of nowhere to becoming one of the top Lincoln dealers in all of Canada, one of the top truck dealers in all of Canada. So I had that kind of entrepreneurial burn inside of her. And she kept mentioning, like, let's do a business together, right? I wanted to get out of hospitality. I knew my future wasn't in that. But we initially almost bought another restaurant. Like, we got offered to by Care Franchising because of my background and hers. She kept mentioning real estate, and she kind of tricked me a little bit, saying, well, get your license when you buy investment properties. You'll save the commission, like your typical consumer thinks, right? Why you get your license. Yeah. And did the tests, and she kind of did trick me to get into commercial real estate to start, and we got a deal from a really good friend of ours. There was a building with 55% vacancy. It was a B-class office building on a main artery road, and he wanted $1 million for it. And it wasn't a great market. This was back in like 2012. She put together some pretty incredible pro formas. We tried to get creative on like, how do we make the deal happen? And what it came down to was finding somebody that wanted to get the building up to par, and that person probably didn't have the money necessarily to buy the building at $1 million, get it appraised for that, and still do all the work. So we structured a very creative VTB, got the guy the building that he wanted. My seller was super happy with the VTB. We did a sale price of $850,000 with a $750,000 VTB, got a really good deposit from the buyer, and he was very well known in the area. That lasted for 5 years. The interest was paying my client a significant amount of money every year. So by the time he was done, the purchase plus the VTB, he got well over $1 million. That client renewed it. And the reason I'm sharing that story is when I realized the impact that you can have on a transactional basis by thinking out of the box, The art of the deal really got me excited. And then it went into, okay, how do I find more clients? How do I market myself differently? And so on and so forth. But really it was that spark of being able to do something on a deal that other agents told us, you're never going to sell it for that price. And we shut them up, and we continue to try and do it every day.
Well, you know what? That's one of the things that I noticed with my sister. She's in commercial real estate. So initially she started in residential, and then she flipped over and she does primarily commercial. And one of the things that I noticed with her, but I also noticed with some of our agents that do the odd commercial deal, is that you can find deals where residential agents sometimes just don't see it. It's like, what is hidden beneath the surface? What's the story behind the curtain, so to speak? So why don't you talk a little bit about that, like the art of the deal and finding deals? Because in Ontario right now, you have to be creative in order to make deals work, right? And so the commercial, having your background would be such a competitive advantage going in, and you see that corner lot, and you have maybe a residential agent that just doesn't look into what's happening in the area, what's the official plan say, and it'd be a simple flip in use, and all of a sudden you can sever it and you could put like two fourplexes or on it, right? And so why don't you talk a little bit about that? And I think a lot of residential agents just don't even know it, because they could be selling a listing thinking they're getting their client a really good price, but they're selling it to maybe a commercial broker that has that experience where they see something that maybe they didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, we see this across all territories and asset classes in real estate where, for example, in areas like, if I was in your area, I wouldn't do any business in your area because there's things that I don't know in terms of how things operate in that area. It's why I would send you the referrals, right? And why I choose referral partners in different markets. When it comes to, say, commercial, residential, and investment, though I almost feel they should be three separate licensing categories altogether. I think you should have to apprentice from an education perspective, have your deals reviewed by people that are astute in the asset class before you can run around and call yourself an investment focused agent, a commercial agent, or a residential agent. Going back to your question, where we see opportunities and strategies is people get very narrow focused in the world that they live in. And it's exactly what you said. So being able to have that commercial mindset, looking at maybe a land use development that would be perfect for residential, but then realizing that Volkswagen just came to Elgin County, and all of a sudden, all of that residential land that you thought was earmarked for houses, you had one client actually who's now an agent at our brokerage who owned a house on this strip. And I'm like, you're probably going to get this much for your house if you just sold it as a house, because that's what the comps say. But if Vicano's paying $200,000 an acre for the land behind you, maybe we should reach out to them and see what their plans are for the 5 land assembly houses at the front of where their gigantic building is going to be. And the reverse is true too. Commercial agents like to disparage res agents as if they don't know how to do anything in terms of sales. They'll call somebody like me a resi-mercial agent because I sell a lot of luxury homes, and optically I may look like somebody who's your traditional agent. But then when I get into a negotiation with them, or I'm dealing with a complex transaction, they like to say that commercial sellers and buyers are an emotion. Guess what? They're human. And I can tell you the advantages of knowing how to navigate human waters, which is the residential agents are the best at, using empathy, really digging deep on the negotiation side. When I bring that aptitude to the commercial side of the business, there's some mandates and deals that, almost blew up in our faces that I was able to save or get to the finish line, because you're able to bring a human component to a business that is like proudly dehumanized itself, right? So I always look for where are the through lines between the different asset classes, and I do try and know my place at the same time and defer to professionals in certain instances where, maybe I don't want to make any assumptions about my skill or what we're trying to tackle, but I'd like to bring a little bit of a different perspective.
Well, and this is where how you built the brokerage. You said you have kind of like the special forces, right? Like you have specialties within the brokerage of certain agents where they go all in on that one side of it, right? And so maybe you talk a little bit about that. Like how are you able to create like an overall brokerage where you have, specialties where you have certain agents focusing on certain areas, and then how do you leverage that to, build to give your business a competitive advantage?
I'll give you an example. Ryan McLean on my team, cash crop advisor. He's worked in agriculture his whole life. He's also won lots of belt buckles at rodeos. He's trained horses his whole life. He's been farming since he was a kid, and he's a grass-fed beef farmer. Like, he actually raises cattle. I have half a cow in my freezer at home that I'm eating as we speak. And he also knows more about farmland than anybody else. So, like, he came to us via referral, which is how all our agents have come to us. We don't recruit. And sat down, and we have a significant farm business that we do already because of family relationships. And like, farms are the gold you can eat. Investors will buy them and sit on them. Builders will buy them and build houses. And they've always fit into our business. But I'm like, man, this guy knows more than I do. So when it comes to bringing on somebody like that, I do think you have to put your ego aside a little bit and see, is there a partnership where 1 + 1 = 3? He can go somewhere else, and I could keep doing my business, and we can compete on stuff. I don't think he's built in terms of like the platform that we have, nor do I think he's interested in media like I am, right? Doing podcasts, building leverage through social, the email lists, like the systems. He's got zero interest in that, but he wants to sell gigantic farms. So, partnering with an agent like that, I can give him 10 years in terms of an on-ramp, in terms of mentorship, a whole bunch of systems. I can take care of really backing him in terms of staff and support, and he can focus on doing what he loves best. And I guess I can go through my entire roster, and it's always a moving target, in this business, to reevaluate what's the vision of your business, who are the partners that are with you, who are the partners that maybe are with you or shouldn't be with you anymore, and making sure that you're in partnership with the right people. That is probably the biggest challenge, is, making sure that we're honest and transparent about our vision, what we expect from the people to bring to the team, what the team's going to bring to them. Sometimes we don't necessarily get that transparency in return, but I think you only get better at your business by going through kind of some of those tougher periods and refining your vision. Right. So that's how we do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that way there you can service clients, if they want to sell their farm and then they want to develop and then they want to sell their house, and, you can keep that all within the brokerage and give them the kind of that white glove service that makes sense.
In our office referrals too. So like, we built an ecosystem that motivates them to keep everything in office, right? Because we've got people, and if we don't, we know there's a hole. And then we ask ourselves, do we want to fill that hole? So we do try to create an ecosystem that generates a lot of business within the brokerage without me having to actually trigger that.
Yeah. Well, this brings me to kind of, it segues really nice into that every agent, I believe, has something unique about them, like a competitive advantage that is really smart to double down on. So like, Justin, you have certain agents where like the guy has a farming background. Like, that's really great to go all in and specialize on that one thing, right? If you're growing up in a certain area or a neighborhood, specialize in that, right? And so if you can, maybe you're a volunteer at your child's school. It's like, go all in and network there. Like, we have an agent on our team, and he goes to all of his kids' sports, and he gets phenomenal business just by speaking and connecting with all the parents, right? And so whatever that is for you, that niche, like, double down on that one thing rather than trying to like compete with everybody at a higher level. Take that specialty. And I think that's what your agents on your team, that's sounds like that's what they're doing.
Yeah, every agent on my team is something more than just an agent. I have a call with her friend Brian Surian at 3 today, and he always likes to say, like, you're an agent in what else, right? Like, when you think of Justin, he told me this. He said real estate and media. He's like, you're good at connecting people. You do a lot of content. Just do that. Don't do anything else. Hire people for the holes. Kyle Henry on my team owns a property management company. Roger Horvath, he's a commercial leasing agent. He was a former helicopter pilot for Air Orange. He flew Air Orange ambulances. Like, there's all these unique things about people that they want to hide because they think they need to be the influencer agent, when in reality, if you like squash and hockey, just go play squash and hockey. Like, don't actively talk about real estate, and everybody's going to want to work with you because they know you do real estate. It's just, you have to identify what that is in yourself and then lean into it. I think that's such great advice.
Well, this is like a belly-to-belly business. I remember this one agent when I started. He drew, actually, I'm just going to draw this for anybody that's watching the YouTube. You see, like, they're basically two lines that are basically like half circles facing each other. And what that means is this, he said to me, Mark, this is the type of business that we run here. And it was basically, he's saying it's belly to belly. This is a belly to belly business. And so anytime you can get in front of other people, whatever that is, go all in and speak with them. And that thing, whatever that is, do maximum 3 things. So, because one of the biggest challenges I see with agents is they try and do everything. So they see you, Justin, and it's like, oh, media, I need to be doing social media. And then they see somebody's talking about door knocking. It's like, I need to do that. And then it's like open houses, I need to do that. And there's like 10 or 20 things that they're trying to do everything, kind of dabble, instead of like going into one to maximum 3 things and go deep on that well and become a master at that. And then ultimately be face-to-face as much as you can. So
here's something I actually did in December to that point. And this is proof positive that even my life isn't perfect, where I look at all of the content I put out and I did a hard audit. I reached out to 2 people I know in the YouTube space and I'm like, rip me apart. Like, what do you think about everything I put out there? And I run 2 platforms. One is Prime Real Estate, and that's all consumer focused, buyers, sellers, investors. And the other is my brand, which is more geared towards people like you, entrepreneurs, business owners. And in my mind, I was like, well, real estate agents will know Justin Konikow, send me referrals. Consumers will call Prime. Great, that's my 2 categories. When they looked at my content, I got the question. They're like, do you recruit? Because you always say you don't. I'm like, no. They're like, do you coach? I'm like, no. They're like, so why is 70% of your personal content look like you want to be a life coach? And I'm like, well, they document me speaking about my journey, and like I put it out there because I figured that would be interesting. That's great. They're like, you have the thought leadership. They're like, take those resources, go all in on the real estate. They said your real estate channel has such an opportunity to grow. And there's so many consumers out there, you're robbing the opportunity of working with you because you're spending resources on something that isn't a part of your business model, right? And I was like, yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow. But this year, we're actually diverting 70% of the budget, time and resources, and going to probably 5X what we're doing on the Prime channel. So, I got to eat that pill and change it, at the same time, right?
So let's segue into getting wise counsel. I think that segues really nicely there. How important is it, and how important was it for you from when you started till now? Did you have wise counsel that you had along the way? And, how important was that to your overall growth when it comes down to getting mentors and advisors along the way?
Well, I would say definitely I've had wise counsel looking out for me my entire life. Whether or not I chose to listen to God, who was the wise counsel, would be a different story. Yeah. I definitely fought many, many times and thought that I could solve it on my own. And it wasn't until I gave up that and I started listening that I started getting the earthly counselors in my life, and people coming to me in very different ways at very different times. And I guess one random thing in my life is I've always ended up in positions with people, zero context to who they were, like at all, right? Some of my largest clients, mentors, sitting at a breakfast table with Daniel Kalenda and Reinhard Bonnke, no context to who they were at all, and got a couple really good life lessons from them that I really think about on a daily basis as to how I interact with my team and the world around me. The other people, the mentors that I had in my life, came via being in their ecosystem, and they had no idea who I was, but me showing up consistently and doing the work. So guys like Scott McGilvery, I met him through our mutual friend, Mike Heddle. So Mike and I were working at the investment summits, and I'd show up at every summit. And I remember walking up to Scott in like 2014, I think it was, and saying, I'm going to build out a division at Prime just to service investors. And like, truthfully, it was me and one other person and like a binder at the time. And I'm sure I was just another name to him. He had no idea who I was, but I kept showing up at other summits with teams a little bit bigger, a little bit more dialed. Our qualifications are a little bit better. We're doing more in terms of servicing the investors. Probably after like 4 or 5 years, he became a really good friend and mentor, where I texted him a photo of the ugliest bathtub you've ever seen last night. And like, we'll ask him business advice, right? Other people around me as well. Like, I would search for people that were practitioners, yourself included, right? And get connected in different ways with people that are doing cool stuff. And I find that there's 2 things that happen. One is you want to run at the speed of the people that you're surrounding yourself with. So that's a big part of it. Even though we don't talk all the time, I watch what you guys are doing, and it definitely drives me. 2, you tend to say things out loud to these people that you need to do, but if you were by yourself, you probably would give up on. So me talking about refining the vision for the team, focusing on building a leadership team, getting dialed on our income and our expenses. Like now I said it to you. So like I kind of have to follow up. So I've always definitely tried to keep my ears and eyes open for people that are people I could learn from, and try to implement the lessons. And that's the last piece. Is I think a lot of people want to get around successful people.
Yeah.
Very few will actually do the work or take the advice that they were given and execute. But if you do, your level of access to those people will be exponential because most people won't actually execute.
Oh, that's so good. There's so much in there. And thanks for sharing, like you had said at the beginning, like with God, that you were at a point where you just weren't listening. And then once you listen, then all these, earthly advisors. What do you think that was? Was it like humility that you just kind of lower your guard? What do you think that was that kind of opened you up to be able to actually hear the advice from advisors that are around us when you said to God, okay, I'm listening to you now? Like what happened there? Was there a moment or?
There was actually a direct correlation. I never actually was able to read the Bible when I was young. I just wouldn't sink in. But then I'd read little passages in like Psalms or Proverbs, and then I would actually see those things in real life. So like I'd see values in people that were successful that aligned with a lot of those lessons, right? About shepherding what you were given, last shall be first, first shall be last. Like people that act like it usually don't have it, and people that have it usually don't act like it, if that makes sense. So it was like a conduit, right? And then, we become the conduits where as we're in relationship with people and you're belly to belly with them, I find that you're just a little bit more attentive, or like you're in the worst situation you can imagine with a client or a partner or a termination, and it could destroy a normal person. Instead, I started looking for like, but where's the thread? Like, where's the lesson in this? And I find that it really just made me a little bit more open to listening to other people and looking for something outside of self. Because I think that's what I really struggled with, is I always thought I can run through a brick wall. I can take control of the situation. It's going to be me that solves it. But I've never, ever in my entire life sold enough real estate, drove in a nice enough car, done anything where the world turns around and says, yeah, finally made it, Justin, right? That's a fallacy that doesn't exist.
Well, that's so cool. I didn't, we've had conversations and we didn't really dive too much into this, but I know for me as well, like being a Christian, that we, on a day-to-day basis, is very simple. As soon as you start getting a little bit of success, thinking you're kind of bigger than you really are, right? You walk a little taller, right? And then you see somebody that's just not maybe getting it in real estate. It's easy to kind of look down or to make a comment. And, for me, that's been such like we'll call it it's brought me down to earth in regards to, you are not that big. Like whatever you've accomplished, you look at, you see a guy like King Solomon, like the guy he was the richest in the world and he's no longer here. Right. And, if you live to 90 years old, the reality is you only have a certain amount of time left. And then when you go back from 2000 years ago and then beyond, you look back at overall time, and the reality is we're like a speck in in time overall. So that has really kind of helped me on and there's just so much more there that we could go down. But I think for me, that's been like a big part of, as well as like continue to double down. And the reality is I'm not just doing it for me. It's like there's a bigger purpose there that is a never ending purpose. Because again, you're just a speck of what the potential is, right? So
it's interesting because if you think of what you're doing now and you think of your children and the life that you're leading, it's more so like, what are people going to say about you when you're gone, and how are those lessons going to trickle into those people, which will trickle into the next group of people? And even if it's one thing that you shared with somebody on how to treat people well, that trickles down into eternity, that's far more valuable than selling, $500 million or $1 billion of real estate, because ultimately, like, none of us are taking a U-Haul with us, right? And I think it is good to put yourself in that position, because in this industry, we glorify the celebrity of being a real estate agent or a successful real estate agent. But how many real estate agents that are successful have good marriages, their kids respect them, and behind closed doors, the people in community with them speak highly or respectful of them because of who they are when the cameras are on and off, right? And I think like the world is very desperate for authenticity. It's probably something I struggle with as I wear my heart on my sleeve, right? Like I'm not one of those guys where say a termination isn't great, where I'm going to be howdy-doody. I'm not going to go around and disparage anybody, but I'm also going to be just a very honest person as to how I conduct my business, my ethics, because I feel like we live in a world that says one thing when the cameras are on and acts very differently when they're off, right?
Yeah. Well, you said something that really hit home for me. It's like, you know, you're not going to be able to take it with you. And it reminds me of one of my buddies was telling me, he said, Mark, he said, when we pass away, people will remember you with a sentence, maximum a sentence. When they talk about you, generally it's a sentence of what they say. So what's the sentence, the short sentence they're going to say about you? And it's so interesting when you think about people that passed away, some family or whatnot. Generally, there's some sort of like line that you say about them that summarizes their whole life, right? And so it's an interesting thing to think about. What do you want that to be? And to be, we'll just say, intentional on a day-to-day basis to build into that.
Yeah, I also think it's a through line where once you identify what those things are, you look for it in all things, right? Like my stack that I try to focus on: faith, family, fitness, fun, finances. I used to have two of those misordered. It was faith, then I went to fitness because I was like, I got to be in good shape to take care of my family. But I realized if I wasn't keeping my family happy, I couldn't get my workouts in the way that I wanted to because I was worried about them, right? And I think if that's actually a phenomenal thing you shared with me that I'm probably going to think about of if I'm the hero of my own movie or I'm living for future me, as Ryan wants to say, how would that dude act? Because I'm probably not acting like him today. I'm screwing up every day. And I think you see the through lines and how you interact with the teller or the person that's homeless on the street or the billionaire who you happen to be in a private dinner with, right? Because that's where I think you can really have impact is in those moments that may not feel like there's a direct ROI. You would know this, like the relationships and how you impact those people is your biggest ROI. You just can't quantify it on a spreadsheet.
So good. Oh man, that's so good. And that applies to everything. That applies to your daily work. It's like, you don't go to the gym and expect to have big muscles on the first day, right? It's like that consistent showing up every day. That's where you get the fruit. And then that applies to all aspects of your life, right? That faith and family and work and finances and all the rest of it. There's a really good book, The Compound Effect by Darren Harding. And he basically talks about that. It's like, you know, much rain wears the marble kind of concept, right? Just showing up every day. But the key is to make it a priority on an ongoing basis and make sure you get it in your calendar. So how have you been able to do that, Justin? You run a big business, family. It sounds like you have a phenomenal, you know, marriage with Shannon there. And, you know, maybe how do you, we'll call it, you know, Jeff Bezos hates the word balance. And I get what he's saying. Like there's like seasons and, you know, going hardcore in business. And I'm doing that and I'm doing, you know, it makes me better as a fan. But what's your perspective on making sure that you're 100% on family and faith and business? And, you know, how do you juggle all of that to be able to get it all done?
I do a lot of self-auditing. Somebody told me once, if I could only judge you by your bank account and your calendar, what would it tell me your ambitions were? Because where you spend your money and where you spend your time are directly correlated to where you're going. And I never used a business plan. Now I do it every year. So we really map out what do we want to accomplish from a faith perspective, family, fitness, fun, finances. And I'll make a giant target for the year. So I had a hip resurfacing 2 years ago. Getting my mobility back, making sure I was moving properly was really important. I worked on that heavily last year. Not binge eating at nighttime because I was doing all the fad diets, keto, intermittent fasting, and then I would eat all the food at nighttime. So I hired a coach, figured out some things that I could do, track my macros, get the grass-fed farmers out there, order half a cow so it's in my fridge, prep myself for success. And then what I would typically do is once a year, I plan my year. Once a quarter, I plan my quarter. Once a month, I plan my month. Once a week, I plan my week. Once a day, I plan my day. So then at nighttime, I would literally just sit down and I go through the same process. I've got my little notebook with me. And I would do the exact same thing is I would scan the day and then see what's critical for tomorrow and prioritize it. I wake up the next day. And then I would think of, if I'm reverse engineering it, how I did it was, well, I want my faith to be in a better place. What do I have to do on a daily basis to get my faith in a right place? Well, I'm like, probably not touch my phone when I wake up, get into scripture. So that's the very first thing that I do. Then I would journal, then I would work out. And I started like creating my life by design. And, you know, it's a bumpy process. I have a, I think, off-market link that I saved on my YouTube channel where I break this down like extensively, where I would like time block and front load my whole year. So like a crazy trip I want to take with Shannon once a year for 30 days, maybe a 1 week vacation every quarter, 5 days off, maybe a staycation. Maybe we go somewhere like Muskoka. We just went to Tennessee on a random road trip, 1 3-day weekend a month. And then once a week, something that scares you, right? So like that cadence now I've front loaded into my calendar. Then I sit down and I'm like, what does a perfect week look like? Because like I was driving everywhere all the time, not being productive. Well, I'm like, Mondays, I'd really like to make it the day I work with Shannon on the business. Tuesdays, I'm in the office training the team. All the prime real estate office stuff happens typically on Tuesdays. Wednesday's a flex day. Thursday's media day. So like typically I don't do podcasts on Tuesdays. I made an exception for this one because you're a friend. Thursday's media day. Friday, Saturday, never book on like repeating events, and I could plug stuff in. I still do kind of my daily habits. Sundays, I always try and keep off. The odd time I have to do something. So now I have like a battle rhythm. And then I would go into my day and I'm like, what do I have to do to be a successful agent? I got to learn the market every day. I need to prospect and I need to market myself. So then I'd put that in my calendar, right? And I think it sounds great the way I say it, and it may scare some agents that are not doing that right now into thinking there's no way I can get there. But guess what? It started with just being a little bit intentional and putting stuff on my calendar. And if you do that, exactly what Mark said, that compound effect of maybe just start with, are you prospecting on a daily basis? Put that in your calendar.
Yeah.
And then you can add some time to look at MLS. And then you could put some time to do marketing. The problem with our business is agents try to do everything at the same time and they get nothing done. And then they get run over by people that are willing to be focused and disciplined in their actions. So long-winded answer, way of saying, I just try and be intentional at where I'm spending my time and I'm spending my money.
Yeah. No, it's smart because when you pre-decide on it, then when you wake up that day, you can just go right to work. And I think that's where a lot of people spend a lot of their willpower is trying to figure out and make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And that's why you see a guy like Steve Jobs, you know, and he was around, he'd wear the same clothes every day. And you try to limit the amount of decisions you make on a day-to-day because at the end, you notice it because at the end of the day, you have decision fatigue and your willpower battery has been drained. And that's why it's easier to get into like junk food and binge watching Netflix and whatnot. But when you pre-decide what you're doing, so like you pick 3 different activities to build your business and go all in on those 3 and just purposely forget about all the other ones. And by forgetting about, that's like Warren Buffett says, write down your 3 priorities and throw the rest of the list away. That means do not look at the rest of the list. Don't even try to don't even go there at all and spend all your time on the 3. Well, what you're doing with pre-planning your days and your priorities and having that, it's just like you don't need to decide on a day-to-day basis. You just need to show up. And if it's in your calendar, you know, more than likely you're going to do it, right?
Yeah, another thing we do every year is a tech sweep. So we'll look at what are we using for comms, data storage, all of the different platforms that we use. And I'm like, if we have 5 different platforms we're using for messaging, text message, email, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Facebook groups, Google Workspace, let's get it to one. Let's get everybody onto one platform because that tech overload is draining our willpower, right? I also think like when I talk about Thursday's media day, what you said, I've lived where I'm like the most distractible person you've ever met. So if I didn't have that framework, I'd randomly be like, I have an idea for a video. And then it maybe gets cut into my prospecting time and I'm just not as intentional. Now that I know where I am and on what days I do what, your brain has this ability of falling into that cadence without you. It's effortless. Like knowing when you do your workout, you kind of primed for that. You just fall into the routine. You don't stop yourself from doing it. If you do date nights with your wife, if you know that you have a set date night or a games night with your kids, you start falling into that cadence. I'm still working on all aspects of my life, and it is a moving target. I just want to anchor that and tell people, like, I maybe only hit my list 60 to 70% of the time, right? I'm not, if anybody says they hit it 95% of the time, they're lying, because they're human, right? And things happen, you know, sickness, family, whatever, all kinds of stuff happens. But even if I only hit it 60 to 70% of the time, I'm still better than 99% of the world who hasn't taken the time to put a plan together at all, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd consider you very, we'll say, tech advanced. I mean, the reality is you've done a great job online. What would you say are your go-to tech platforms that you're using? I know you had mentioned you had many of them in the kind of the goals to, pull it in. Are there any platforms that are like, these are our go-to that have really helped you with the business?
Google Workspace has been a game changer. And that's me like actively trying to force myself to only use, that's the backbone, right? That's where our data's stored. That's our office suite. So like Google Docs, Google Sheets, it's basically like Office, Word, Excel. And even like, for example, using Zoom as a third party, I'm like, we have Google Meet. Why do we need Zoom? We don't need to use Zoom, right? So like that's been integral of just being in that mentality and looking for opportunities to shift stuff there. Every agent needs a really good CRM. We use Follow Boss. To me, that's one of the best CRMs on the planet. But no CRM is the silver bullet.
Yeah.
It's names, it's emails, it's stage, and then it's tags. You can export that to any platform. The key is actually using it. We have some big goals with what we want to do with our CRM this year to refine and make sure that the accountability piece is there. So we're really excited about that. In terms of like other softwares, honestly, like my calendar is my most important software. Like we use Asana for project management, but I don't manage the systems. My team manages it and then puts everything in my calendar with a simple link to whatever it is I need to do.
Yeah.
So all I do is click on the thing, go to it, do what I need to do, hit the thumbs up button, and I'm done with that task for the day. I'm not spending hours of my life searching in the drive or looking in the emails for that thing related to that task. So I'd say like getting everything that you should be doing on your calendar before you start your workday to me has been the biggest. And then we can get into social marketing and all that stuff as well. Obviously, I do some stuff in that space.
Yeah, no. Well, well, why don't you continue there on the social side? What are your go-to platforms that you've seen the biggest growth on, or the biggest? I know that there's different platforms for different kind of missions, but what would you say, if you were to kind of summarize it, have been kind of your go-to where you've seen the most amount of results from?
My email newsletter is by far number one, because I own the data and I own the lists. So, I'm probably a blue belt at where I want to be in that. I definitely going to put more effort into that space, but for sure. Then Instagram, then YouTube, then Facebook, then Google My Business, then TikTok. Twitter and LinkedIn are actually dark horses as well. I think similar to what I said earlier, like I think you can only really be good at one or two, right? And I think pillar piece of content. So YouTube's my number one, I think, in terms of importance to me, because if I do that well, if I do that really well, then my newsletter and everything else becomes easier, because I have the video content that can be chopped up and put into the newsletters and everything else. I'm going to make a prediction with what's happening with TikTok. I've heard rumors Meta bought it, so we'll see what happens with that. I do think with what Zuckerberg has been announcing recently, Facebook and Instagram are going to be a place to put a lot of effort in 2025, because it lost a lot of traction to the other platforms in 2024. And I think with the shift, opening it up a little bit more, they're investing in it. I think we're going to get a little bit more dialed on our Facebook and Instagram strategy, and I'm excited to mess around and play with it.
Yeah, well, that to me, there's real wisdom in what you said. The Instagram and Facebook is kind of like the hook, and YouTube. People go there to become educated, right? Not just to be entertained. And so if you can bring them into the YouTube platform, I think that's smart. And you said something as well at the beginning. You said the email list, and I think this is just such a underrated part of a real estate agent's business, is building that list, because any sort of influencer, they say that, the goal is not so much building these social platforms. The goal is to scrape that contact information and bring them into your email list, because that's your real estate that you own, right? You're basically renting space in all these different social platforms. So like make that email distribution, make that phenomenal content. I think that is just so underrated right now. And I mean, that's your number one that you're getting. And, same with us, we have like 50,000 on our distribution list, right? And so that's like a lot of people getting information. So the goal is to make that as strong as possible. And every other influencer that's out there, they say the same thing: build your email list because you own that real estate, so to speak.
TikTok can go away tomorrow, right? You saw everybody freaking
Yeah.
out over the weekend.
Yeah.
They're follow me here, follow me there. Like they're at the behest of the platform. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, they need me more than I need them, to be quite frank with you, right? Because I own the emails and I have the relationships. And not only that, I own the phone numbers. So like worst case scenario, I'll lock myself in my office for a week and I'll call every single person on that list with my team. Like at the end of the day, I think that's where there's a big shift happening, right? We went from large companies that you couldn't compete with running ad budgets that a guy like me or you couldn't really, we'd have to go like open houses and door to door to really affect change. Social media kind of made it a level playing field, where I would even argue that we have a larger digital footprint than one of the oldest brokerages in Canada. And we're pretty new. Like we've been around since 2015.
Yeah.
And if I keep building personal brand and I keep building our database and we stay focused on that, the ability for us to carve out our own niche in this business is like nothing you've ever seen before. And it's wild because it's free to a certain extent. Like it's you taking the effort and the consistency to add. People always ask, how do you build a following? How do you build an email list? I'm like, 10 names a day.
Yeah.
Can you do 10 names a day over 4 days a week? I'll give you Fridays off. Can you do that 48 weeks a year consistently for 10 years? That's how you build an email list. But again, most people won't do the work. That's what it comes down to. Right?
Yeah, it takes time for sure. So Ryan Serhant, what can you tell the agents about that relationship? Because I've seen some of the videos that you've done with him, and it looks like you're getting some counsel from that end. How's that going when it comes down to learning and any shared information there that you've received on that end? Because he's from a influencer standpoint, I'd consider him probably the largest, most widely known real estate agent out there. Well, how's the experience been with Ryan for all the listeners out there?
It's been good. I actually met him through Jazz Tackar originally. Jazz hooked me up with Jordan because I told Jazz, called me one day. He was like, how do I start a YouTube channel? So I went to his office, showed him. Yeah. And that was his way of thanking me. I went down to meet Ryan in 2018. And I thought in my head, what's this guy going to teach me about real estate? Like he's in Manhattan. I'm in London, Ontario at the time. But it's funny because I always go to my wife, who's my counsel, and she's like, it's a great opportunity. Like not many people get those opportunities. Bring a couple guys with you. I brought 2 of my agents at the time and, film a podcast, get the photo op. And I sat down with him and I asked him 3 very specific questions and he gave me everything. Like he ended up giving me, his splits, his plan, how he recruits, way more information than I ever thought he'd get. I didn't air that episode for a couple years. And then I had to edit out some stuff because he had left Nest Seekers at the time. But it's what you said earlier, right? Like I wasn't in awe of his celebrity. I was just like, this dude's doing what I want to do. I should pick his brain. And he gave me some ideas. And then I got in his ecosystem and met Jenna Les, Social Joe, Krista, Jordan Hurt, who's like one of the stars of Owning Manhattan, who was Ryan's assistant at the time. And they were fantastic. Like built some good relationships with some of them. And, at the time they didn't have SOPs like I had, but they were really good at building brands. So I shared my SOPs with one of their team members. They gave me some stuff. All this happened in the background without Ryan knowing. A year later, I came back, met Ryan. I was like, here's what you told me. Here's what I did. New set of problems. And I don't expect a lot of somebody like that. I know a lot of people want to become his best friend, but I'm like, he's busy. Like the best thing I could do is probably not bug him. Yeah. But when I showed up the next year, I was like, new set of problems. I kind of saw this little light go off in his eye. Because guys like you, guys like him, anybody that I've met that's a player and likes the game gets excited at solving hard things or like giving their perspective on other people's problems and saying, this is what I did that work. It might not work for you, but try it. And that's been the progression of our relationship. Now, full circle, last September, they asked me to come speak at their sales conference. So they ran Sell It 2024. It was amazing. It was at Moonlight Studios. one of the best run sales conferences I've ever been to. And it was kind of like a coming home moment for me, because over the last 5, 6, 7 years, their team's fingerprints are all over every aspect of our business. Because when rough stuff would come up, I would email him or I'd email one of his team members. And man, they just give and they give, and zero expectation of like, they've never asked me to do anything. They've offered me like referral fees and stuff for like the amount of work I do on the back end where people call me and ask me about the program, but I've never taken a dime, because it's getting people in your life who see more in you than you see in yourself. His team was definitely about it, but I also think it was being in proximity to their ecosystem. It's done so much for us where you want to drive yourself to be better at what you do. Find somebody like him and get around them consistently and show up. And it'll drive you to execute at a much higher level than you ever thought possible. So the relationship's still there. We'll be there. Brian was actually just on my podcast last week from his team. I also think Brendan Bogart, I'll introduce you to. He'd be an excellent guest for your podcast. He's a killer, one of Ryan's top new development guys. And man, just getting around people like you, man, it's really, really changed our business in a lot of ways.
Justin, what you told me at the beginning there on how you implemented what he told you. So he gave you advice. You went back a year later, said, I implemented the advice. Now I have a new set of problems. The fact that you took his advice and executed on it, I'm telling you that that is so rare. And I could say probably the new set of problems was like, okay, great, I'm going to attack that. But I can tell you that you actually took his advice and did it was such a compliment, because you know, the amount of times, I don't know, you probably have this as well, where you'll give advice, but you never hear anything back. Or like you give advice and then the next year it's the same advice you're giving again. But when somebody takes it and they actually do it and they come back and say, this is what actually happened, that is so rare. And I'm telling you, it's such a huge compliment. So if anybody ever gives you advice and instead of just like, yeah, I got it, it's like, okay, you write it down and you go and execute. The best compliment you can give them is to actually do it and then tell them you did it. And I'm telling you, you'll have a fan. They'll open up to you unlike, you know, you've ever seen.
I think being respectful of people's time is important too, right? So like when I went back to him, I didn't expect him to know who I was for like 2 or 3 years. He still mispronounces my name every now and then, and like they're family to me, right? And that's why I share that story. Is I tell people that are listening, like the amount of times I remember an agent once worked at Prime and handed her, I don't even know, probably $10 million in business. And all of a sudden, Valentine's Day, I get a phone call. And literally the call was, hey, I got another opportunity at this virtual brokerage. I could coach, I could do this, I could do that. I'm like, yeah, sure. No factor. Like, all the best, right? And the reason why I was okay with that was really at the time, I knew she wasn't doing the things that I told her would lead to success with the leads that I had given her. Went into the database and I looked and I was like, that's okay that you don't belong here, because we're not built for somebody like you, right? And I think the other people that have shown up, like Ryan McLean sat in my office and said, nobody's going to work as hard as me. Yeah. And I wasn't hiring at the time. I was like, oh, bet. I was like, okay, let's see. So he came, started working in the farmers division, started converting, started selling at a $5 million sale as his like third sale, right? And very simple things, but like throwing tests at them and saying, hey, do this. Yeah. And they don't realize that if they do it, I've got this lined up over here. For sure. They'll never know if they don't execute. So I think that's a great thing to point out to the audience.
100%. It is so rare. And it's just like how you like with your team members as well. It's like they go and execute. There's bigger things waiting there, but they gotta show you that they can do that first thing.
100%.
The other thing that you said that Ryan is, and I know you're the same way as well. I watched this movie recently called The Forge. If you haven't seen it, it's just a really good one. And in there, they talk about being a fountain, not a drain. A fountain, not a drain. And so it sounds like that's how Ryan was. It's like give. And it's like when somebody comes to you for information rather than sucking, it's like, I'm gonna give you a drink of water, right? And so I think that is such a good, we'll say, analogy to be able to operate your life on a day-to-day basis. It's like be a fountain rather than a drain. And the cool thing is when you give information, and that's like part of the podcast as well, people are like, well, you're sharing all your secrets and, you know, you're why are you training other agents? It's like, listen, like the more you give, the more you receive, right? Sure. And so being a fountain rather than a drain is just, I really like that analogy. It sounds like that's how Ryan operates, and I know you as well.
Most people that I respect operate from that capacity. And
Yeah.
here's I think the reason why. I think part of it is we're a little bit crazy, and it's like stream of consciousness. We work out ideas by talking about them. Then we ask ourselves, do I really believe what I said to Mark? Like, are there aspects of my business that I need to change to become the person that I'm saying I'm driving towards being? And I also think we're not afraid to leave what got us here behind, because we know that markets shift, and what you need to become is not the person who you already were. And I also say this as well, like the person that I am today, if every agent left here and came back in 5 years, the version of Justin they're going to meet is very different than the one that they've known for the last 5 years, because I'm trying to strive towards growth. So Ryan, yourself, Heddle, I can go down the list, Scott, all these other people. Every time I meet them, it's like, what are you working on now? Like, what are your problems now? And like, it's just about, I think of life as a potluck, and we're all bringing something to the table. And I want people that are bringing their grandma's favorite dish or a story or something. I don't want the person that's showing up taking all the steak and lobster that's not contributing to the community as a whole, right? So that's a great way to explain it.
Such a great conversation. So there's so many things real estate agents can invest in today. And I know that this is one of your specialties, is in the investment side. So, and for us on the real estate investment firm, we got to say no to, I've said this before on the podcast, like 200 different opportunities to find the one golden nugget. So by saying no, though, we're able to deliver, phenomenal returns type thing. So for all that said, for the listeners out there that, maybe they have some money that they've saved up, they're investing in themselves and they have some dollars to invest in, what's your recommendation? What kind of advice do you have for them to be able to, make that money work for themselves so that down the road they're working in real estate because they want to, not because they have to?
So I'd say the quickest on-ramp, you have time, skill, and money. So if you have some money, I would use that to get around somebody that's years ahead of you in the thing you want to do. You could get into some type of partnership or joint venture deal with that person, but you have to bring something of value to the relationship over and beyond, say, just the capital, because capital is very easy to get if you can find deals, right? I also think education is out there. Be very careful about what you consume online, because not everybody has the same end goal or experience to actually execute. But I think you need to decide what asset class you're interested in and areas that you think are opportunity zones. This is why I said get around somebody that's doing it, right? Whether it's apartment buildings, storage facilities, if I'm looking for land, there's people that are armed with a significant amount of knowledge. Right. They've got the skill, they just don't have the time. And if you can interject yourself somewhere in that space where maybe you have the time, you have some capital, and you can build a relationship with somebody in that space, man, you know this, right? Like, you want to learn how to build an apartment building, do a deal with somebody who builds apartment buildings, and then see if it's something you want to tackle, right? I would say that's probably going to be your quickest on-ramp.
Yeah, so good. I have this in my room here. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed, right? And so that to me is like bang on what you said. It's like go to somebody that's doing it at a big level and get wise counsel from them. And, that's so you're not trying to figure it out themselves. Or you read a news article and then you take action on it just based on that news article. It's like some people, they're doing, this is their whole full-time thing that they're doing, right? And they'll be willing to share if you ask the question. And what's even better, if you go back to what we talked about, if you implement what they told you, you will be a rock star in their eyes if you come back after and you told them you did it. Yeah. And I just think that's such a good nugget there. Very cool. Well, listen, Jess, I could keep talking to you all day. We could talk about business, and I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface here, but we are coming up to the rapid fire section here of the talk. So you ready to go? We got 3 questions for you.
Rock and roll.
Cool. All right. So first question, favorite book that's made the biggest impact in your life?
The Bible for sure, number one. But I would say Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. Definitely one of the best books I read in 2024.
Yeah, so good. That was something that we had built a leadership team, and I didn't actually have an assistant. And I read that book, and I'm like, oh man, buy back your time. And then I ended up hiring somebody. And then that's when I did that. I was able to actually launch the podcast, because I've been talking about this for years. And so, I mean, you've met Stephanie. She's been phenomenal. Yeah. And so there's no way I could be doing this. And so it's pretty cool to be able to take something like that and implement what you've learned. And that's one of my faves as well that highly recommend. All right. So second question here, what 3 words would best describe you?
So this is actually something I learned through the Sirhan program. So I'll teach you how to figure it out, and then I'll tell you. So it's ask 5 people in your life that are close to you, probably a family member or a spouse, maybe a past client, and then somebody you work with, and ask them to pick 3 adjectives that describe you. And we do this on people's birthdays at Prime, or randomly I'll ask people throughout the day, and it was creative, driven, and connected. Those were the 3 words that kept coming up over and over and over. And then you can actually get into some pretty crazy stuff in terms of like brand color science, font, and typography, and align all of those things together and see that through line, like you spoke earlier about, of how those words are being translated in the content that you're putting out to the community.
So good. And that's where, if you can tie that together in a book and tie together your core client, your fonts, your brand, and tie that all together, that, oh man, we could go down. That's a whole other talk. Maybe we'll do that one time. I'll have you back.
For sure.
We'll talk about branding and marketing on that end, but very cool. Okay. So, and last question, what advice would you give the listeners? Maybe that's just starting out in real estate, or maybe some advice that you'd give your younger self.
You are valued, and you don't need anybody's permission to try, right? I think too many people are scared of what are other people going to think about me. I realized it took me 42 years to figure this out. Nobody cares. They're too busy with their own lives. And there's only one person at the end of the day that you need to be accountable to. So just try the thing. Don't be too precious about your time. If you only have time, skill, or money, use your time, get skill, get money, buy back your time, hire skill.
Well, there's wise counsel here from Justin. And Justin, how can the listeners get a hold of you? Maybe they want to send a referral. So London, you have, maybe share the serving areas that you service. And, if you have a buyer or seller, make sure you send them to Justin there. Maybe you could share that and how they can reach out to you.
Yeah, so I represent the London Greater Region. So the LGA is our territory now. London's the hub of it, but we go all the way from Grand Bend to Port Stanley. We go from Kitchener to Sarnia. We have territory and asset class coverage in all of those areas. We also do these mastermind series in person at amazing properties. We do live podcasts. Mark, I'll get you out at one of them one day too, and get you in person in community. It's really important to us that we turn these online relationships into real life. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. It's making me better by proximity.
Very cool. Well, it was a pleasure, Justin. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for listening, guys. If you like the show, please share and subscribe to the channel, where we are building a community of full out real estate agents. I love you guys, and keep on going full out.